Hello and welcome to Heilman and Haver, the stage and screen experience, coming to you in podcast form from Casa de Quinn and 1111 Studios on the beautiful shores of Puget Sound, Washington. Welcome to episode 74. I'm Greg Heilman.
And I'm Matt Haver. Back in 2020, we took to the internet airwaves as two actors just looking to hone our craft, interviewing talented local actors and directors. Now, over 70 shows later, thanks to you, Heilman and Haver is Seattle's #1 stage and screen podcast, bringing you in-depth interviews with the likes of Emmy Award winners and best-selling authors, unsung heroes and industry leaders, and the finest talent from LA to Broadway to the UK.
All while keeping our pulse on the Seattle and Pacific Northwest theater scene with in-depth reviews, awards, cast and crew conversations, and behind-the-scenes tours and interviews. Find them all at HeilmanandHaver.com and on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
And don't forget to visit the video section of our website and YouTube channel for our In the Mix segments. If you've been a listener for long, you know there are two things Mr. Heilman and I both enjoy, especially when taken together: cocktails and classic film. Nothing sends you back to the time of the dames and Duesenbergs like a Paloma or gin sling. And today we're joined by a man who is a connoisseur of both fine film and fine libations, the Czar of Noir himself, Eddie Muller. Eddie produces, programs, and hosts a national network of Noir City film festivals, including right here in Seattle, presented under the auspices of the Film Noir Foundation, a nonprofit corporation he founded in 2005 to rescue and restore films from America and abroad. The foundation also publishes Noir City magazine, the world's leading publication on classic and contemporary noir.
Eddie is also the host of TCM's Noir Alley and the prolific author of crime fiction like The Distance, and is a recipient of the Raven Award from the Mystery Writers of America. His other books include biographies like Tab Hunter Confidential, cinema histories including Dark City, The Lost World of Film Noir, and the upcoming children's book, Kid Noir, Kitty Farrell and the Case of the Marshmallow Monkey. His latest book, Eddie Muller's Noir Bar, cocktails inspired by the world of film noir, Eddie pairs classic cocktails and modern noir-inspired libations with behind-the-scenes anecdotes and insights on film favorites like The Asphalt Jungle, The Big Sleep, and Nightmare Alley. Eddie Muller's Noir Bar hits shelves on May 23rd and is available for pre-order now and linked in our show notes. Eddie joins us from his home in the Bay Area. Welcome to the show, Eddie.
Welcome.
Welcome, guys. I'm very happy to be here.
We're glad to have you, and
Indeed.
we're glad to see your new book, Noir Bar, which we received preview copies of a little while ago, and I've already scrubbed all the pages for some of the really cool stuff in there. But it may be, out of all the books you've written quite a bit, none more timely than this book, Noir Bar. I mean, not only is film noir going through kind of a bit of a renaissance, but with COVID, it led to an increase in, we all stayed indoors, and we all took up mixology as a hobby. I know I did. And my liquor cabinet, you can ask Matt, my liquor cabinet is busting at the seams.
It's a beauty.
But this book, reading through it, the first thing I thought of when I saw the Blue Gardenia piece was, man, I would have saved hours of looking at the internet to try to figure out how to make a pearl diver. So my point is, with the conversion of noir's popularity and the growth of amateur mixology, the book couldn't have come at a better time. Was there a specific moment for you that sparked this idea, or have you kind of been ruminating on this for a little while?
Well, yes, it obviously, I think in many ways, COVID was the impetus for doing this, but it had been brewing for quite a long time. I mean, I can give you a funny answer to this, or I can give you a more thoughtful, serious answer to this. But when COVID happened, I had to do my show from home. I had to do the Noir Alley on TCM. I had to record it at home. And TCM, the emergency plan was they sent me a ton of equipment so that I could do this, right? But I was by myself. I mean, nobody was coming in here. I had no cameramen or grips or anything. I'm doing it all myself, right? I think you guys might be able to relate.
Oh, yeah.
So I had this equipment, and I suddenly was like back in film school, because back in the 70s, I was going to be a filmmaker, and I learned how to light a set and do all this stuff. And so it all came back in a rush. And then after I'd shoot the show and I was relaxing, it was like, oh, look, I got this camera here and I got this stuff, what can I do? So I started doing cocktail stuff to post on YouTube. And I probably did, like, I don't know how many of those I did, right? I created my own, and I am not a social media guy, believe me. And then all of a sudden I found myself doing this, and then it became like an obligatory thing and people were like digging it. And then it was like, my God, what have I created? How am I going to get out of this? Well, the book was the answer as to how am I going to get out of this, right? And so it was so funny because my editor, Running Press, who published the book, fabulous. They did such a great job with it. But when I was talking to my editor about another book project, because they also published Dark City, The Lost World of Film Noir, the revised and expanded edition of that. And it did so well that they said, what do you want to do next? And we were talking about ideas. And then Cindy Sapala, my editor, said, what about a cocktail book? And I said, yeah, absolutely. I would do that in a heartbeat. And she said, well, prepare a proposal. And I said, well, here's the link to my YouTube channel, because she had never seen that I had done all these things already, right? So that was kind of how it started. But I'm much more a print guy. I'm so old school. I'm a print guy. I mean, I want a beautiful book that you can hold in your hands and all that stuff. And I just couldn't be happier with the way the whole thing turned out.
Now, you've got a beautiful book. It's visually really a lot of fun to go through. Not only the old stills from the films, but the graphics, the photography. I really loved it. You really captured that feeling of noir with just the whole layout. And you had a couple of folks helping you: Jessica Schmidt, Forrest Burdett. How did that team come about? And is that a group you put together, or was that your publishers?
Actually, you're getting ahead of yourself, because Jessica and Forrest worked on another book with me that hasn't come out yet.
Oh, gotcha.
But I'm just going to take your cue there and go straight to this team, which is a fella named Paul Keppel, was the designer of Noir Bar. And Paul is a world-class designer. He did all the print collateral material for Hamilton, the stage play, and he's done books with J.J. Abrams and David Lynch. And I was very, very lucky to get him at a point when he used to work for the publisher and then went off and created his own design agency. And the production designer at Running Press called him and said, you might be interested in this one. Can we coax you back into the fold to design this? And Paul said, yeah, I'd love to do this book. And I just felt so fortunate, because I flew back, masked up and everything. I flew back to Philadelphia, where he has his agency, and we spent 3 or 4 days where I was actually making the cocktails in his studio. And then a wonderful photographer named Steve Legato took the pictures, and a prop stylist, Kelsey Windmiller, styled everything, which is basically providing the cool backdrops and all this stuff. And then Steve would light the cocktails and I would make them. I actually made the cocktails that are seen in the book. And then Paul would design these fabulous layouts. I mean, he went so far as to create, new typography for the various cocktails that is, in many cases, based on the title sequences of the films. So if you look at like a Fallen Angel cocktail, or, the Betty Grable cocktail that's tied in with I Wake Up Screaming, he's actually simulating the title sequences of those movies and many others. I mean, it was just, I love working with really, really creative, talented people. And this crew was fantastic.
Yeah, how much fun that had to be.
Yeah, it sounds like it was truly collaborative too, that you guys, working together at the same time versus having the idea or supplying the text and having them go and design it and back and forth. It sounded like you did a lot of this in the same room together.
We did. There's no substitute for that. And I was so grateful to the publishing house for agreeing to do that, because I think it was a special case where they said, we really want Eddie to be there with the crew. And it worked. It really provided an extra level of energy and excitement to the whole thing. And there was just great stuff, because Paul is he's so creative and he's so intuitive that we would be doing stuff and he would immediately he'd be designing a page layout while we were preparing the cocktail. And Steve's like setting up the lighting. And then I could say, well, there's a scene in the movie where this happens and we could try to simulate that. And a lot of times you will work with people where they would say, dude, give me a break. We just want to get this done.
Too many bartenders behind the bar.
Yeah. But in this case, every time I offered something like that, their attitude was, oh, that's awesome. That's cool. Let's see if we can do that. So like I said, I felt very, very fortunate.
Well, you've got a little bit of everything in this book. You've got gin drinks, rum drinks, martinis, champagne cocktails, and even a couple of tiki drinks.
Not too many tiki drinks.
Not too many, but they are there.
Well, you mentioned the Pearl Diver, and that one I had to include because it's one of the rare instances where a cocktail is actually called by name in a film, right? Where it's like, well, what are we drinking? Oh, it's a Polynesian Pearl Diver, right? From the Blue Gardenia. And Ann Baxter gets really ripped drinking a few too many of these, right? And it's a complicated cocktail to make. And I said to somebody the other day, I was joking around, and somebody said, I sure hope you gave a recipe for the Pearl Diver and that it's easier to make than other ones I've seen. And I said, there are no easy ones. I mean, that's the whole point, right? You got to work hard to make this cocktail. And I said, if Ann Baxter had made this drink herself, she never would have had any problems in that movie because she wouldn't have had 4 of them. She would have just had the one and said, I'm done. I'm not going through all this trouble again.
Well, and the great thing is you go to so much trouble to make this mix, and you make so much of it that you just have to drink it for like the next 2 weeks. I mean, it's
that is a summertime drink, definitely.
It is, yes, for sure. But you've also created some of your own noir cocktails. The Belita for one, and my favorite out of the ones you've created, the Sailor Beware, paired with the Orson Welles film, The Lady from Shanghai.
Now, I got to ask, when you say it's your favorite, is that because you actually made one and drank it?
Yes, I did.
Oh, very good. That makes me extremely happy to hear that.
Yes, I've made a few. My goal is to do the Julie and Julia thing and just go through all of them at some point, but time being what it is and my liver being what it is.
And I'm going to taste test for them.
Yeah. Well, I'm telling you that's the best. I mean, that's what I love about doing a book like this is, the review is I made the cocktail and I really loved it. I mean, that's the review, right? I mean, the rest of it is fine, but that's where the rubber meets the road here,
Oh,
so
for sure.
thank you for saying that because I'm very proud of that cocktail.
Yeah,
I would love that to become like a real thing in cocktail programs and stuff or in bars. That would be fantastic. I will tell you one funny tidbit about that. That cocktail was originally called The Lady from Shanghai. That's what I called it, right? And I thought that's how it's going to become a staple, right? Because people are going to equate it with the film and it's going to be, hey, bartender, I want a lady from Shanghai, right? I thought that sounded so cool. But then I had so much respect for Paul Keppel as a designer that when he was doing the book, he said, you have to call it something else because I don't want to use the title of the film and the name of the cocktail on the same page. It looks bad design-wise to repeat The Lady from Shanghai. And I said, but Paul, that's the one. That's the drink that I've created that is the best of all of the ones that I made for this book. And I want to call it A Lady from Shanghai. And only because I respected Paul so much did I cave in. And I said, okay, I'll call it something else. And I had to do a lot of research to make sure that there wasn't another cocktail called a Sailor Beware. And amazingly, you would think that would be a standard thing on a tiki bar menu, right?
Or somewhere in New England or somewhere, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they have the missionaries' downfall and all this stuff in tiki bars, but you would figure there's a Sailor Beware, but there wasn't. So I adopted that one, and let's hope it becomes a real thing,
Well, that might need to become the official cocktail of Heilman and Haver because we have our In the Mix segment where we kind of do the same as what you were doing during COVID. The quarantine is find a film or find an actor or maybe an anniversary of something, a birthday, and make a cocktail that links with that person or maybe that film. Lady from Shanghai, one of my favorite Orson Welles films. It's funny. The most response we've gotten on our YouTube channel was probably the weirdest drink we made, and it was the Alaskan polar bear heater from the Nutty Professor. And like Greg spoke about, hey, you make enough of this stuff, you got to finish it. And of course, we had one on camera, and then we had one off camera, and surprisingly okay. But it's always funny because we get our email, pops up, hey, another comment on that Alaskan polar bear heater. But I got to ask you, you bartended in the Bay Area. It was one of your first jobs, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So were there any other drinks in the book from bygone days, some favorites that you used to make or anything? Maybe it was like, one of the first cocktails you remember making, something like that kind of had a, kind of that nostalgia for you?
That's an interesting question. When I started bartending, it was not a trendy thing whatsoever, because this was in the 1970s. And let's face it, in the San Francisco Bay Area in the 1970s, people were smoking dope. They weren't drinking cocktails, right? The whole cocktail culture renaissance had not happened. But for some reason, probably because of my love for these old movies where everybody drank cocktails, right? I was like, I want to learn how to do that. But back then, the drinks were like, Harvey Wallbangers and stuff like that, and none of those particularly appealed to me. I mean, the one that is totally not correct for that I include in the book that has no connection to film noir at all is the tequila sunrise. But I included it because of Robert Wagner, because he did this film called A Kiss Before Dying. And when I went on a TCM cruise with Robert Wagner, we drank a lot of tequila together. and I thought, like, I want to make and he made one noir film, right? This Kiss Before Dying. And I said, I'm going to make this cocktail in his honor. And because it's a color noir, I thought the color of the tequila sunrise cocktail felt very much like the color scheme of the movie. And so I included that, even though that drink wasn't created, 20 years after the movie was made, right? It's a total 70s cocktail. Anyway, it's interesting. I mean, researching this stuff and figuring out what to include was really a lot of fun, because it led me to, there's a website, I'm embarrassed to say I can't remember the link right now. You're going to get a lot of calls or emails from people saying, give us that link. Yeah. Which there's a website, you guys may already know it, that has all these cocktail recipe books all the way back to the 1800s. And they have scanned them and put everything up on the site. And you can just scroll through everything and find old cocktails. It's absolutely fantastic. And so I was able to go and find a lot of like Prohibition era cocktails that were named after actors. The Lee Tracy cocktail, the Joan Blondell, the Joan Bennett, the Ann Sheridan. These were all created in like the early to late 30s. And they were just fantastic. And so I was able to discover those and tie them into the noir films that these people made.
Yeah, it's interesting because you've got the kind of the Prohibition era cocktails, those simpler ones that are maybe more tied to some of the pre-code films, and then you get into noir, and then things start to become a little more complicated. And then you get, and I loved your comment about I forget how you put it in your introduction about kind of the hipster thing where everybody's making these weird ingredients and trying to put things together that's just kind of gotten out of hand that you've tried to stay away from, and thank you for that.
Get this cedar branch out of my drink.
I mean, I like all of that. I find that all kind of interesting. I want somebody to make one of those drinks for me. I don't want to stay home and make them myself, right? But I also was very aware that because of the Noir Alley show, and that it is on a weekend night, a lot of people watch it on Saturday nights, right? That it's become a thing that people tune in and they drink a cocktail with the movie. So it's not like something that we're making up or suggesting that people do. They already do it, right? So it's like, well, okay, then try these. But I was very aware of the fact that I didn't want it to be a hipster kind of book. I wanted it to be more reflective of the original era that these films came from. So I tried to stay away from overly complicated stuff. And sometimes that, it went in the reverse. Like the Lee Tracy cocktail, which was from the early 30s, is made with sloe gin. And it's really hard to find any cocktails today made with sloe gin, right? And not only that, it's sloe gin, dry curacao, and absinthe, right? So, like, two of those ingredients you're just not really going to find if it was like 5 years ago. You're not going to find sloe gin or absinthe in any liquor store 5 years ago, but now you can.
Yeah.
Did you run into any situations where, like, we did a segment about the Vesper Martini, and is it Lillet Blanc that is not made anymore? Yeah. So did you run into any recipes where you couldn't find the ingredients anywhere?
Quinoa Lillet, yeah.
Quinoa Lillet, that's right. Yeah.
Quinoa Lillet, yeah. Which I do make a reference to that in the book, in fact, that you're not going to find. It wasn't for a Vesper, it was for something else. But I said, you're not going to find this anymore. On occasion, like I did a Brooklyn cocktail, which is a real thing, in honor of Barbara Stanwyck, my favorite actress of all time. And Emma Picon is one of the ingredients in that, which is not easy to find. Right, it's not readily available in the United States. I still have 2 bottles that I brought back from France when I was there, and it's like I have to parcel this out judiciously, because I don't know where I'm going to find this. It may be available now, but a few years ago it was not. But I on occasion I will use a hard to find ingredient, but it's something I tried to stay away from.
Yeah, I did find that the recipes are all very accessible from anyone who's got a basic bar setup. And it was nice to see that I've got, because a lot of times I'll see things and need to go get a bottle for something that's 1 ounce, and then I end up that bottle sits on my shelf for years. But thankfully, the majority of your recipes, I already have the stuff. So it makes it very accessible. And I think people are going to find that they've already got the things in their liquor cabinet, that it'll make it even more popular.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that, because that was a very conscious decision on my part. I didn't want people to, they're paying $26 or whatever it is to buy the book. I don't want them to break the bank and then now I have to go out and spend $400 buying the booze, And I also stayed away from, trying to be too specific about what brand you have to have, It's like, figure it out for yourself, right? I mean, everybody has their go-to gin and bourbon and rye or scotch, whatever. And so, make this stuff, be creative, have fun, figure out what works best for you. And it becomes yours, it becomes your drink. And I'm just trying to give people ideas and have fun with it. I'm not being a total stickler on this stuff.
Well, and I also appreciated the fact that for those of us who don't have I'll call it a mature bar set up, that you kind of explain how to do that, kind of some of the basics, some of the equipment you need, a few of the glasses you'll need, and again, without breaking the bank, to become an adequate bartender for yourself or a few friends. And so now I'm curious about maybe going back a few years before you were doing a lot of this stuff, on purpose. Was there any time when you sat down and you watched a movie, and a movie, like you said, maybe they're not always mentioned, the cocktails aren't mentioned by name, but it kind of puts you in mind of a cocktail, or maybe you sat down with a cocktail and having this encyclopedic knowledge of film like you do in noir film, you had the cocktail and it reminded you of a movie?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Wow. I don't actually know. I'm going to spin that a little bit, because what was the most fun about doing this book was watching a movie and then rewatching a movie from the point of view of, if I was going to make a cocktail based on this film, what would it be? How would that work out, right? And it was a very interesting experience, because as a bartender, I had never before made my own drinks. I never concocted a drink. I was just making stuff from the standard, from the Patrick Duffy bar guide, or, whatever, Jerry Thomas or something, But when you act like the Sailor Beware, it really was sort of like, okay, there are four main characters. You're going to put four ingredients in the drink. What booze represents these characters, you know? And then when I did the Belita, I'm glad you mentioned that one earlier, because Belita is one of my, passions in noir that totally obscure actress. Nobody knows about her. But I said, if I was making a Belita cocktail, it has to be a frozen cocktail because she was an ice skater, right?
Right.
And it obviously has to be blue because of the ice. You want the blue ice, and so it was just, it's fun. And gin because she was British. So if you're British, it's like you automatically gin is the
Of course.
base spirit.
Yeah.
So just thinking in that way became very interesting for me. It was like 8 months of my life where every movie I watched, I was just thinking about the booze that went along with it, right? So, but to your question, I'm not sure if I've ever done it the other way, starting with the cocktail and working back. I don't know. The horse's neck always stands out from In a Lonely Place because they make such a big deal out of it. And I don't know if you've seen the film, but Bogart in his smoking jacket, and he's got an at-home bar, and he's making this drink, and the woman that he's brought home with him says, "Oh, I'll just have a horse's neck," and he's like, "The hell is that?"
Yeah.
and it's nothing. It's ginger ale and a big spiral of lemon. That's it. And but if I strongly suggest bumping that up with a little bourbon or something.
Something Bogey would have had in his repertoire.
Exactly.
Is there a non-noir drink associated with a movie that stands out as maybe a favorite of yours?
Boy, you guys are putting me on the spot now. I know there's something that's like hysterically great that I'm just spacing out on. I don't remember what they drink in this great pre-code movie called One Way Passage. Do you know this movie?
That's exactly where I was going because the Paradise, which is my favorite.
Oh,
So
the Paradise. That's it. Yeah. So there, we were on the same page. I just couldn't. But the Paradise with William Powell and Kay Francis. Yep. It's just the whole drinking thing in that movie. Aboard ship is just so fantastic, and the breaking of the glass and the whole thing. I love all of that, and that was Wilson Meisner, who was the character that William Powell plays, is kind of based on Wilson Meisner, who wrote the treatment for that movie. And he's actually in the movie. He's one of the guys in the bar in the movie. Incredible character. So yes, that's one that stands out. And I can tell you that this is not an ad or anything, but it's going to be great fun doing the TCM cruise this fall. Now that I have this book, because I can imagine that we'll probably do some kind of barroom based something on the cruise, with this book as the centerpiece. That'll be great fun.
And that's in November?
It is in November. Yes.
Yeah, I know it's on one of the Disney cruise ships, if I'm not mistaken, too.
It is. I can't remember which one. It's one we have not been on before. So I'm greatly looking, and it's also leaving from the West Coast as opposed from Florida, where all the other ones have left from. And I'm looking forward to it because those are great fun. The cruises are great fun.
Well, speaking of that, kind of along the same lines, we just had the second Noir City Seattle back after COVID. I didn't get a chance to go to this year's. I saw you do the intros for the first weekend, and last year's, the first one back. How does it feel to be back out on the road hosting these events with actual people after COVID? It's got to be pretty exciting for you.
I think it's exciting for everybody. I just think being able to be back out in public and watching movies as a group is a tremendous thing. I'm very, very proud of how well these Noir City festivals do in a time when everything is, we're all being told that the movie going experience is ending. The movies, first run movies are in decline, repertory cinemas are dying out, all of this stuff. There's no turning back the tide. And then we do our festivals and we fill theaters. The Egyptian Theater in Seattle is pretty much full
Mm-hmm.
every day and night during Noir City. And I understand that it's a special thing, but it's not that big a deal. I mean, we're showing old films and there's a little extra razzmatazz we put on it, with we'll have some jazz musicians or something. I really loved it when we had that Seattle burlesque troupe came out and did a whole show with us. That was fantastic. They were great.
We got some great ones in Seattle.
Yeah. And so, you just do a little extra to, as gift wrap on the movies. And I have found that people who are so inclined, and they come in all ages and colors, and it's not who you suspect it is that relates to this, but if you put the bat signal up there, people will respond, and it's fantastic. And so, yeah, more than just it's nice to see people back congregating again. I feel very proud of the fact that this film series that I create, it's been over 20 years now that I've been doing this, that it continues to draw really, really, really well. And that we survived COVID. And a lot of people told me that this is the first public thing that I've done since COVID was come to your film festival. And that means a lot to me.
Well, you've been dubbed the Czar of Noir, and who better to ask about the definition of noir? I'm a relative newcomer to noir. I like noir literature. I guess I would call it that. Just read To Have and Have Not by Hemingway. Excellent book. Raymond Chandler. Some of these other authors from that era. Hammett comes to mind, obviously. But as far as film goes, and obviously a lot of these films came from books, what is your definition of noir? Sometimes it gets, mistakenly categorized, the years that relate, all those types of things. Is there a film that perfectly captures the essence of noir? And maybe the flip side of that, is there a film that's not noir but gets mistaken as noir regularly? You have to kind of correct people. Okay, you probably get that a lot.
Well, the two movies that are the exemplars of the form, because I'm going to even hesitate to call it a genre because it isn't absolutely a genre. I mean, it's crime movies. But the two movies are Double Indemnity and Out of the Past, are the two films that I always tell people, if you want the crash course, if you're not going to commit to a month of watching these films, you just want a night of watching the films, then do a double bill of Double Indemnity and Out of the Past, and you'll get it, right? So what noir is an organic artistic movement that happened in the 1940s that really was an outgrowth of the Depression, because artists were not allowed to fully express the breadth of their vision during the Depression, because Hollywood's job was to boost morale and make people, all those pre-code movies. You guys are familiar with this, right? If that had kept going, noir probably would have been born a lot sooner as a movement, because the seeds of it were already there in a lot of these pre-code films, right? But then the crash happened, and then the production code came along, and it stalled everything. So, and then right when noir literature started to really take hold in the late 30s and early 40s, then World War II happened. And so that kind of put another, bookmark, like we can't really make these adaptations of this stuff yet. So when it was obvious that we were going to win the war, the surprising twist to this story was that instead of the movement coming out of Hollywood being celebratory because we'd saved the world and won the war, it was just the opposite. It was like artists who'd been longing to make films that were like the anti-myth. It's not going to end happily ever after. They finally were liberated by winning the war, and they got to make those movies. And the studios allowed it to happen because they were sexy, because the movies were very sexy. And it was something that hadn't been seen before. It didn't cost a lot of money to make them. And so for a while there, everybody was pumping these out. The 8 studios in Hollywood, they were all making at least 10 of these a year because they didn't cost a lot of money. And then the actors were a huge part of it because they said, oh, this is cool. The lead doesn't have to be a hero. I want to play that character. Right. And so you found, like, when Tyrone Power made Nightmare Alley, it was like, here's, Zorro suddenly playing this sinister, horrible person on screen. Obviously, its lifetime was limited because the studios said, okay, and enough of that. You guys had your fun. you know, but that's kind of how it happened. Its influence is still felt to this day, because it was an artistic movement led by artists. It was not led by the money guys. It was not led by the producers. It was the artists saying, we want to do this. Those movies look the way they look because the cinematographers said, this will look really great. Let's do it this way.
Right.
And everybody started copying it. So it's Hollywood, right? If something succeeds, keep doing it.
Anything from recent years that puts you in mind of these wonderful noir films, or as kind of an homage? Anything that even gotten close?
There's so much of it that it's kind of, I can't just pick one thing, because look, I'm kind of an expert in this stuff, so I see the underpinnings of it in everything. If you want to talk about the Coen brothers, you want to talk about Martin Scorsese, you want to talk about Christopher Nolan, David Fincher, all of these major filmmakers, they know they're noir. They really know they're noir. But I find it very exciting when they extend it in an interesting way that isn't an obvious imitation of what had gone before. I'll give you a classic example. The film Mulholland Falls, right, with Nick Nolte and Chaz Palminteri. It's not really very good. Sorry, the guys who made that, but it was an imitation of an old noir. Now, Mulholland Drive by David Lynch is a totally noir-informed movie that is nothing like typical film noir. I mean, it's a totally different thing. But it's about, a Hollywood actress who loses her mind, and it's a subconscious, you're experiencing her subconscious prior to her hiring a murder to be committed, and then she ends up killing herself. That's pretty freaking noir, right? But it's told in a way that it's absolutely unrecognizable if you're looking for an imitation of classic noir. But it really is.
I wasn't sure because I watched a few months ago. Watched Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and I started to wonder: is that a noir? Is it a tribute to noir? Is it just kind of
Of course, yeah. I mean, it's not super complicated. It's like a detective story where the animated tunes are for real. I mean, that's what Roger Rabbit is, right? And yeah, I mean, and not only that, I think it's a great double bill with Chinatown, because they're both based on actual historical facts in Southern California, right? One about transportation, the public transportation being destroyed so they could build the freeways and the car companies could sell everybody a car. And then the other one is about water. Like, how do you get water in a desert? Right. Well, corruption is the answer. Right? So, yeah, I have no hesitation. Include Who Framed Roger Rabbit in the discussion of noir, particularly as it applies to the actual noir history of Los Angeles.
Right.
Well, we can't let you go without discussing the wonderful work you do with the Film Noir Foundation as its founder and president. We've previously had Tracy Gossel on the show, who's founder of the Film Preservation Society, and talked about the wonderful things they do with some of the old silent films. Could you talk a little bit about the work that the Film Noir Foundation does in promoting film noir and helping to prevent some of these great films from getting lost to the annals of time?
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity to plug that work. Yeah, it started out because there were movies that I had seen on television or really bad tapes of. And it's like when I started doing film festivals, why can't I show this movie? Why is there no 35 millimeter print of this film? And I got a crash course in why that all happens. And a lot of these movies are orphans because they were made independently, separate from the studios. The studio may have distributed the films, but they didn't actually make them. So they didn't have them in inventory. They didn't own them, right? And in that case, they could very easily disappear. So it was our own detective story of tracking down, do elements exist for these films, and can we clear the rights, and can we actually find enough good material to restore the film and get it back in circulation. So that was how that all started. And then my searches overseas, because in some cases I only found the elements in a foreign film archive. And then once I was overseas doing this research, then I started to discover foreign noir films that nobody had ever heard of. And so we've restored a lot of stuff from Argentina, which had an amazing, thriving film industry before, honestly, Hollywood kind of kiboshed that. And I'm finding this to be true all over the world, right? Finding stuff in Norway and Spain and Germany, and there are noir. When I wrote my first book on film noir, I felt I was writing about a completely American phenomenon. And then lo and behold, 20 something, 25 years later, I realized, it wasn't just happening here. It was actually happening all over the world because the films were shipped around and inspired each other. When I watch the films in Argentina, it's like, well, this is a combination of Naked City and Brute Force. Two American films were clearly an influence on this film called Apenas un Delincuente, Hardly a Criminal. And you realize that that happens all over the world all the time. You just don't get to see the end result. And so I've been very excited about the Film Noir Foundation's work in restoring a lot of these foreign films and getting them back in circulation and kind of rewriting some of film history in the process. It's great.
Well, as we mentioned in your bio, quite the Renaissance man. You got a lot of irons in the fire. You alluded to a new book project on the horizon. What's next for you, and how do all of our listeners keep up with all things Eddie Muller?
Well, the book on the horizon that you mentioned earlier, when you mentioned Jessica and Forrest Burdett, is a children's book that I've written. Running Press said to me, we've got this idea for a line of books called Kid Noir. Would you be interested in that? And I said, on one condition, will the artwork be black and white?
Right.
Because if it's black and white and a kid reads this book, then they're not going to be freaked out when they watch a black and white movie, right? If they like the book and I do my job right and I tell them a good story, then when they see the black and white movie, they're going to say, oh, this is like that book I love.
Yeah.
Right.
Soft launch. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really important. I'll kind of wind things up by saying this. When I started doing all this work, it was all about, preserving the films that I loved. Then it became, through the festivals and then the foundation and everything, it became about preserving the experience of seeing these movies the way they were meant to be seen in a movie theater, right? Then I got this gig on TCM, and now we are really working diligently to preserve the audience for these films.
Mm-hmm.
and showing younger people, don't make the mistake of thinking these are old corny movies that don't apply anymore, right? Like, Martin Scorsese said, there are no old movies, there are just movies you haven't seen yet.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's a hard idea for some people to grasp, but it's very true. I mean, once you realize that all movies are fake, all movies are artificial, the entire thing is a put on, right? So when you say, oh, that isn't realistic, it's like, I'm sorry, what movie is actually realistic?
It came from a place called the Dream Factory.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And then you have a great opportunity to think about, well, why were they made that way then? And they're made differently now, because then once you ask those questions, then you're actually figuring out how culture works, and how you make these transitions, and are they good transitions or not? Ask TCM fans their opinion of that, right? Yeah, I mean, every single thing is prefaced with, they don't make them like that anymore. It's like, yeah, they don't, and there's a reason why they don't, but that doesn't mean you should stop watching the ones that were made back then.
Yep.
Absolutely. Well, we're glad that we've been able to spend some time with you and get that message out to our listeners, because I don't think there's two guys who feel more strongly that way than Greg and I.
Oh, fantastic.
Yep.
You guys are great. I really, this was great fun. I thank you so much for having me on. And I really appreciate your drinking the Sailor Beware and giving it a thumbs up. And now I think I'm going to have to go make one of my own.
We just had a new deck built in the house. We're going to have Matt over. We're going to do our next In the Mix segment and drink that and tribute to your book and the film. Maybe we'll screen the film while we're doing it.
Fantastic.
Thanks, Eddie. It's been fun.
Right, thanks.
Absolute pleasure, guys. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you again to our guest, Eddie Muller. His new book, Eddie Muller's Noir Bar, Cocktails Inspired by the World of Film Noir, hits shelves on May 23rd and is available now for pre-order and linked in our show notes. Join us on Friday, May 26th for episode 75 as we celebrate with special guest Chris Lemmon, author, television and film actor, star of the acclaimed one-man show A Twist of Lemon, and, as you might have guessed it, son of beloved Oscar-winning actor Jack Lemmon.
Episode 75, Friday, May 26th, so mark your calendars. And if you enjoyed episode 74, please make sure to follow us and share the podcast with a friend. You can find all the latest on HeilmanandHaver.com, along with all of our past episodes, stage reviews, and popular segments like Get to Know a Theater, In the Mix, and behind-the-scenes artist interviews. As always, thank you for supporting local theater and for joining us on Heilman and Haver.